Hello, dear sleepyheads. Tonight we journey to the endless grasslands of Central Asia, where a great empire rose beneath the wide sky. Picture vast steppes stretching beyond the horizon, where the wind whispers through tall grass and carries the scent of wildflowers. Here, under a canopy of countless stars, the greatest land empire in human history began with the dreams of a young boy named Temujin. Close your eyes and let the gentle rhythm of this story carry you across centuries and continents. Feel the soft grass beneath your feet as we walk together through time, watching as scattered tribes become one people, as horsemen ride across continents, and as a single vision transforms the world. The campfires are warm, the night is peaceful, and our story unfolds like morning mist across the steppe. Tonight, we witness the rise of the Mongol Empire, not through the clash of swords, but through the quiet strength of unity, the patient wisdom of leadership, and the enduring power of human ambition. Let the vast sky above us remind you that even the mightiest empires, like the stars themselves, shine brightest before they fade into gentle memory. Breathe deeply, and let us begin our journey to a time when the world was young and the horizon called to those brave enough to answer. The early life of Temujin. In the year 1162, when the world was still vast and unmapped, a child was born on the steppes of Mongolia, whose destiny would reshape the known world. The grasslands stretched endlessly in every direction, painted gold by the morning sun, while gentle winds carried the songs of larks across the silent vastness. This was a land where the sky touched the earth at every horizon, where seasons moved like slow tides across an ocean of grass. The boy was named Temujin, and he entered a world both beautiful and harsh. His father, Yesugei, was a minor chieftain of the Borjigin clan, one of many scattered tribes that wandered these endless plains like stars scattered across the night sky. The Mongol people lived as they had for countless generations, following their herds of horses, sheep, and cattle across the seasonal pastures, their felt yurts rising and falling like mushrooms after rain. Picture young Temujin in those early days, his small figure silhouetted against the enormous sky, learning to ride before he could properly walk. The Mongol children grew up as one with their horses, and the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats became the heartbeat of their lives. In the evening, as the sun painted the clouds in shades of amber and rose, families would gather around their fires, the flames dancing against the darkening sky, while elders told stories of ancestral spirits and distant lands. The Mongol society of Temujin's youth was like a vast tapestry woven from countless threads. Each tribe was independent, bound together by kinship, honor, and the ancient customs that governed life on the steppe. There were the Taichiud, the Merkits, the Naimans, and dozens of others, each with their own grazing grounds, their own chiefs, their own proud traditions. Like flowers in a meadow, they bloomed separately, beautiful in their diversity, yet vulnerable in their isolation. When Temujin was 9 years old, his world changed forever. His father, Yesugei, was poisoned by Tatar rivals, enemies whose enmity stretched back through generations like the roots of the ancient grass. The boy's comfortable life dissolved like morning frost, leaving his family abandoned and struggling to survive. his father's followers scattered like leaves before the wind, seeking the protection of stronger leaders, leaving Temujin's mother Hoelun to raise her children alone on the unforgiving steppe. These were the years that forged the future conqueror's spirit, though he could not have known it then. The family lived in poverty, surviving on wild roots, fish from the streams, and whatever small game young Temujin could catch. His mother, strong as the eternal grass itself, kept her children alive through winters that seemed to last forever. Her voice gentle as she told them stories by their meager fire, her hands steady as she taught them the skills they needed to survive. Picture the young boy, during those lean years, standing on a hill overlooking the vast steppe, his clothes patched and worn, but his eyes bright with determination. The wind tousled his hair as he gazed across the grasslands that stretched to every horizon, perhaps already dreaming of the day when the scattered tribes would answer to his call. Even in poverty, there was something about him that commanded attention, a quiet strength that drew others to follow him. As Temujin grew into his teenage years, the traits that would make him a great leader began to show themselves like the first green shoots of spring. He formed alliances with other young men who, like him, had been cast aside by the traditional power structures. His blood brother Jamuka became his closest companion, and together they roamed the steppes, learning the art of survival and the delicate dance of tribal politics. The young man learned to read the steppe like others read written words. He could tell from the way grass bent which direction the wind had blown for days past. He could judge the health of horses from the sound of their breathing, predict weather from the behavior of birds, and find water in seemingly barren land by watching where the animals went to drink. These skills, learned in hardship, would later serve him well when he led armies across continents. But perhaps most importantly, Temujin learned the value of loyalty and the price of betrayal. When his half-brother stole a fish he had caught, the future Khan made a decision that would echo through history. He eliminated the threat to his family's survival, showing the cold pragmatism that would later guide his military campaigns. It was a harsh lesson from a harsh land, where survival often meant at making impossible choices under the endless sky. As the seasons turned and Temujin approached manhood, his reputation began to spread across the steppes like ripples on a quiet pond. Stories were told around campfires of the young man who refused to bow, who gathered followers despite having no inheritance, who possessed an almost supernatural ability to inspire loyalty. The tribal chiefs began to take notice of this upstart, some seeing opportunity, others sensing threat. The steppe at night was a place of infinite beauty and mystery. Under a canopy of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, young Temujin would lie outside his family's humble yurt and gaze upward, perhaps wondering what destiny awaited him. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a great river, and the future conqueror may have imagined following it to lands beyond imagination. In those quiet moments, with only the gentle snoring of horses and the distant call of night birds to break the silence, the seeds of an empire were taking root in one young man's mind. The boy who had lost everything was learning to dream of gaining the world, and the vast steppe around him seemed to whisper that anything was possible under its endless sky. Unification of the Mongol tribes. As the 12th century drew toward its close, the Mongol steppes resembled a vast puzzle with pieces scattered by centuries of tribal feuding. The grasslands that had witnessed young Temujin's difficult childhood now watched as he began the slow, patient work of gathering these pieces together. Like a shepherd collecting a scattered flock, he would spend the next decades bringing the proud, independent tribes under one banner. The process began not with grand declarations or mighty battles, but with the quiet work of building trust. Picture Temujin, now a young man of perhaps 25, sitting by a fire with potential allies, his voice calm and measured as he spoke of shared prosperity and common purpose. The flames danced between them, casting shifting shadows on faces weathered by wind and sun, while overhead the familiar stars bore witness to conversations that would change the world. His first great alliance was with Togrul, Khan of the Karaites, one of the most powerful tribes on the steppe. Togrul had been a friend of Temujin's father, and this connection, fragile as spider silk, but strong as iron, became the foundation upon which greater things would be built. The old Khan saw something in the young upstart, perhaps recognizing the rare combination of ambition and wisdom that marks true leaders. The relationship between Temujin and his childhood friend Jamuka grew more complex as both men gathered followers. Like two rivers flowing in different directions, their paths began to diverge despite their shared past. Where Temujin embraced those cast aside by traditional society, welcoming warriors regardless of their birth, Jamuka held to the old ways, maintaining the rigid hierarchies that had governed steppe life for generations. The difference between their approaches was like the difference between the old grass and the new growth each spring. Jamuka represented the established order, beautiful in its traditions, but resistant to change. Temujin embodied something new, a vision of unity that transcended the ancient divisions between tribes, clans, and bloodlines. His followers included not just born warriors, but craftsmen, herders, and even former enemies who had seen the wisdom in his cause. Picture the great gathering at Baljuna, where Temujin and his most loyal followers shared water from a muddy spring and swore oaths of eternal loyalty. The wind whistled across the empty steppe as these men, numbering fewer than 24, pledged themselves to a vision that must have seemed impossible to outside observers. Yet there, under the vast sky, they laid the foundation for the largest contiguous land empire in human history. The process of unification was like the patient work of weaving, each thread carefully placed to strengthen the whole. Temujin understood that the Mongol tribes were like wild horses, magnificent in their independence, but capable of far greater things when working together. He spent years learning the complex web of relationships, grievances, and loyalties that connected and divided the various clans. Some tribes came to him through negotiation, recognizing the advantages of alliance over continued conflict. Others required more persuasion, but even these campaigns were conducted with careful attention to minimizing unnecessary destruction. Temujin had learned from his difficult youth that waste was the enemy of survival, and he applied this lesson to his military campaigns. The Merkits, who had once kidnapped his wife, Berta, fell to a carefully planned assault that recovered not just his beloved, but also demonstrated to other tribes the futility of opposing him. The attack was swift and decisive, like a summer storm that clears the air and brings fresh growth in its wake. Those who surrendered were treated with honor. Those who resisted found their resistance overcome, but their people welcomed into the growing confederation. As news of Temujin's successes spread across the steppes, it traveled like the songs of migrating birds, carrying hope to some and concern to others. The traditional power structure, dominated by established khans and ancient bloodlines, began to recognize the threat this upstart represented. A coalition formed against him, led by his former friend Jamukha and supported by tribal leaders who feared the loss of their privileged positions. The confrontation, when it came, was like the meeting of two great weather systems on the open steppe. At the Battle of Dalan Balzut, the two visions of Mongol society clashed under a sky dark with storm clouds. Though Temujin suffered a tactical defeat, the battle revealed something more important than military victory. Many of Jamukha's own followers, witnessing the cruel treatment of prisoners, began to question their leader's methods and consider the alternative offered by his rival. The years that followed were marked by a patient campaign of winning hearts and minds. Temujin's reputation for fair treatment of both allies and enemies spread like morning light across the grasslands. Warriors began to defect from other leaders, bringing with them not just their swords, but their knowledge of tribal politics and military tactics. The transformation of the steppes during these years was like watching a garden slowly take shape under a master gardener's care. Where once there had been only scattered settlements and wandering tribes, a new structure began to emerge. Temujin organized his growing forces not according to old tribal lines, but based on merit and loyalty, creating units of 10, 100, and 1,000 warriors whose bonds transcended their original clan affiliations. As the 12th century gave way to the 13th, the young leader who had once been abandoned to starve on the steppes found himself the master of an increasingly unified Mongol confederation. The scattered tribes were becoming one people, their individual strengths woven together like the threads of a great tapestry. The boy who had gazed at the stars and dreamed of greatness was now a man whose dreams were becoming reality under that same endless sky. The stage was set for the final act of unification, the moment when Temujin would claim the title that would echo through history. But that triumph still lay ahead, waiting like the dawn beyond the eastern horizon, patient and inevitable as the turning of the seasons on the eternal steppe. Coronation and early conquests. The year 1206 dawned clear and bright over the Mongol steppes, the spring sun warming grasslands that stretched endlessly toward every horizon. It was the kind of morning that seemed to hold infinite possibility, when the air itself felt alive with promise and the wind carried whispers of great events to come. On this day, the scattered tribes of Mongolia would witness the birth of an empire that would reshape the known world. Picture the great gathering, or Kurultai, as it assembled near the Onon River, where young Temujin had once played as a child. Thousands of warriors, their horses, creating a living sea of movement across the plain, converged on this sacred site. Their felt yurts rose like mushrooms after rain, creating a temporary city under the vast blue dome of the steppe sky. The air thrummed with the sound of voices, the neighing of horses, and the subtle tension that precedes momentous change. The ceremony itself was simple, yet profound, rooted in traditions as old as the grasslands themselves. As Temujin stood before the assembled chiefs and warriors, the morning light seemed to gather around him like a golden cloak. The shamans performed the ancient rituals, calling upon the eternal blue sky to witness and bless this moment. Then, with voices that carried across the plain like thunder, the gathered Mongols proclaimed him Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. The name meant more than just supreme leader. It carried with it the weight of destiny and the promise of unity. As the acclamation echoed across the steppes, it seemed as though the very grass bent in acknowledgement, and the wind itself carried the news to the farthest corners of the known world. The boy who had once begged for scraps had become the master of a nation, and his people looked to him with the faith of those who had found their true purpose. Genghis Khan's first great innovation was the transformation of Mongol society itself. Like a master craftsman, reshaping raw materials into something both beautiful and functional, he took the ancient tribal system and forged it into something entirely new. The old divisions between clans were replaced with a decimal system based on units of 10,000, 1,000, 100, and 10. Warriors were bound not by blood, but by loyalty, creating bonds stronger than kinship. The new organization was like the structure of a great tree, with strong roots in tradition, but branches reaching toward innovation. The Khan appointed his most trusted companions, the Nokas, to positions of leadership based on merit rather than birth. Men who had once been outcasts found themselves commanding thousands, while traditional nobles who could not adapt to the new order found their influence fading like yesterday's campfire. Under the endless sky that had witnessed his rise, Genghis Khan began to look beyond the steppes that had shaped him. The Mongol Confederation was now strong enough to contemplate greater challenges, and the world beyond their grasslands beckoned like a distant mountain range on the horizon. But the Khan was too wise to rush into unprepared conquest. First, he needed to test his newly unified forces against worthy opponents. The western Xia kingdom, nestled in the corridor between the Mongolian steppes and the heart of China, became the testing ground for Mongol military might. Picture the campaign as it unfolded like a masterfully planned dance, with Mongol cavalry flowing across the landscape like water finding its course. The siege of their capital demonstrated the adaptability that would become a hallmark of Mongol warfare, as the steppe warriors learned to master techniques of siege warfare from Chinese engineers who joined their cause. The conquest proceeded with the methodical patience of a skilled hunter stalking his prey. Cities that surrendered were treated with honor, their populations integrated into the growing empire as valued subjects. Those that resisted found their defenses overcome by an enemy unlike any they had faced before. Warriors who combined the mobility of the steppe with tactical innovations borrowed from every conquered foe. News of Mongol victories spread like ripples across the vast continent, carrying with them a mixture of fear and fascination. The Jin dynasty of northern China, secure behind their great walls and ancient traditions, began to take notice of these upstart barbarians from the grasslands. Their emissaries arrived at Genghis Khan's court with demands for tribute, unaware that they were addressing a man who had already begun to dream of ruling their empire. The Khan's response was measured but firm, delivered with the quiet confidence of one who had unified warring tribes through force of will and wisdom. He rejected the demand for tribute with words that would echo through history, declaring that the Mongols owed allegiance to no one but the eternal blue sky. The die was cast for a conflict that would reshape East Asia, though the Jin rulers could not yet comprehend the storm that was gathering on their northern border. As the years passed and victory followed victory, the Mongol war machine refined itself like a sword being tempered in the forge. The cavalry units learned to coordinate their movements with precision that amazed their enemies, appearing and disappearing like mirages on the desert, striking where least expected and vanishing before effective retaliation could be organized. The siege of Beijing in 1215 marked the Mongols' emergence as a world power. The great city, with its towering walls and centuries of history, fell to an enemy that many had dismissed as mere nomadic raiders. The victory was achieved not through brute force alone, but through the intelligent application of siege techniques learned from conquered engineers, the patient work of diplomacy that turned defenders against each other, and the psychological warfare that had become a Mongol specialty. Picture the moment when Genghis Khan stood atop the walls of Beijing, gazing out over a city that had been ancient when his ancestors were still unknown wanderers on the steppes. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and in that light the Khan may have seen a reflection of his own remarkable journey from abandoned child to conqueror of nations. The transformation was complete. The Mongol tribes, once scattered like stars across the night sky, had become a single constellation whose light was visible from every corner of the known world. Under Genghis Khan's leadership, they had evolved from pastoral nomads into the masters of the largest contiguous land empire in human history, and their story was just beginning to unfold like the endless grasslands under the eternal blue sky. The Great Conquests. From the windswept steppes of Mongolia, the sound of hoofbeats began to echo across continents like distant thunder, promising a transformative storm. The unified Mongol nation, having tasted victory against the Western Xia and the Jin dynasty, now turned its gaze toward horizons that stretched beyond imagination. Under Genghis Khan's patient guidance, what had begun as tribal raids evolved into coordinated campaigns that would carry Mongol banners from the shores of the Pacific to the banks of the Danube. Picture the great war councils held under starlit skies, where the Khan and his generals planned campaigns with the methodical precision of master craftsmen. Maps drawn on leather and bark showed lands that most Mongols had never seen, while captured scholars and merchants described cities whose wealth seemed to flow like rivers through distant kingdoms. The campfires burned low as strategies took shape, each decision weighed with the understanding that the fate of nations hung in the balance. The conquest of the Khwarezmid Empire began not with military ambition, but with the simple desire for trade. Genghis Khan, ever the pragmatist, had sent a commercial embassy to establish peaceful relations with Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad II. The caravan carried not weapons, but goods, silk and furs, and precious stones that represented the growing prosperity of the Mongol Confederation. It was an olive branch extended across the vast distances that separated their peoples. The massacre of this peaceful embassy at Otrar was like a match struck in a field of dry grass. The Shah's governor, perhaps misunderstanding the nature of the power he faced, ordered the execution of the Mongol envoys and the confiscation of their goods. When news of this betrayal reached Genghis Khan, it is said that he stood silent for a long time on a hill overlooking the steppes, watching clouds gather on the horizon as if reading omens in their movement. The campaign that followed demonstrated the Mongol military machine at its most efficient and terrifying. Like a force of nature unleashed, the Mongol armies swept across Central Asia with the inevitability of a seasonal flood. Cities that had stood for centuries fell within days, their walls breached by siege engines operated by Chinese engineers who had joined the Mongol cause, their defenses overwhelmed by cavalry attacks coordinated with mathematical precision. Samarkand, the jewel of the Silk Road, opened its gates after witnessing the fate of Bukhara, whose capture had been achieved through a combination of military brilliance and psychological warfare. The Mongol generals had learned that fear could be more effective than arrows, that the reputation of invincibility could open gates that might otherwise require lengthy sieges to breach. Picture the great cities of Central Asia during those fateful months, their markets still busy with traders from distant lands, their scholars debating philosophy in ancient halls, their artisans creating works of beauty that would outlast the empires that commissioned them. Few could have imagined that their world was about to be transformed by horsemen from the distant steppes, men who had learned the art of war in a land where survival itself was a daily challenge. The pursuit of the fleeing Shah Muhammad became an epic chase across the breadth of Asia, with Mongol cavalry covering distances that seemed impossible to their enemies. Like hounds following a scent, the Mongol generals Jebe and Subutai led their forces through lands they had never seen, adapting to new terrains and climates with the flexibility that had made them masters of the steppes. The campaign culminated not with a great battle, but with the Shah's lonely death on an island in the Caspian Sea, abandoned by his followers and haunted by the collapse of an empire that had once seemed unassailable. It was a fitting end to a conflict that had begun with the rejection of peaceful commerce and ended with the transformation of the known world. Meanwhile, other Mongol armies were writing their own chapters in this great story of conquest. In China, the patient siege warfare continued against the Jin dynasty, with Mongol forces learning to master the complex art of governing sedentary populations while maintaining their own nomadic traditions. The challenge was like trying to blend water and oil, requiring innovations in administration that would prove as important as any military victory. The Western campaign pushed even further into uncharted territory. Mongol cavalry crossed the Caucasus Mountains like a tide that refused to be contained by geography, sweeping into the lands of the Georgians and Armenians with the same methodical efficiency they had shown in Central Asia. Each victory brought new knowledge, new techniques, new possibilities for further expansion. Picture the Mongol camp on the shores of the Black Sea, the first time these children of the steppes had gazed upon waters that stretched beyond the horizon. The sight must have seemed both familiar and alien to men accustomed to grasslands that rolled like green seas under the endless sky. Here, where Europe and Asia met, they paused to consolidate their gains and plan the next phase of their extraordinary expansion. The Battle of the Kalka River in 1223 announced the Mongol presence to the princes of Rus with the clarity of a bell tolling across the morning landscape. The combined forces of Russian and Cuman warriors, impressive by any measure, were swept away like leaves before an autumn storm. The victory demonstrated that European military traditions were no more effective against Mongol tactics than the armies of China or Central Asia had been. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these conquests was not their extent, but their integration. Like a river that grows stronger as tributaries join its flow, the Mongol Empire absorbed the knowledge, skills, and wisdom of every conquered territory. Chinese siege engineers worked alongside Persian administrators and Arab scholars, creating a synthesis of human knowledge unprecedented in its scope and ambition. The Mongol communication system, the Yam, began to stretch across the conquered territories like a vast nervous system, carrying messages and maintaining contact across distances that had previously made coordinated rule impossible. Riders galloped along established routes, changing horses at way stations, ensuring that news and orders could travel from the Khan's court to the furthest provinces in a matter of weeks rather than months. As the sun set on the first phase of Mongol expansion, Genghis Khan could look out from his tent across lands that bore the hoofprints of his horses from China to the Caspian Sea. The boy who had once starved on the steppes had become the master of territories larger than any previous conqueror had dreamed of ruling. Yet even this vast empire was only the beginning of a story that would reshape the ancient world like spring rain transforming the winter landscape. Administration, trade, and cultural exchange. In the quiet years that followed the great conquests, when the thunder of hoofbeats had settled into the gentle rhythm of administrative efficiency, the Mongol Empire revealed its greatest achievement. It was not merely the conquest of the territories that marked Genghis Khan's legacy, but the transformation of those scattered lands into a unified system that facilitated human connection on an unprecedented scale. Like a master weaver, creating a tapestry from threads of many colors, the Mongols wove together the diverse peoples and cultures under their rule into something entirely new. Picture the Silk Road during this golden age, no longer a dangerous path through hostile territories, but a protected highway where merchants could travel in safety from the Mediterranean to the Pacific. The ancient trade routes, which had existed for centuries as tentative connections between distant civilizations, became the arteries of a single vast organism. Caravans that once required armed escorts and bribes for local warlords now traveled under the protection of a single authority that stretched across continents. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, descended over Eurasia like a gentle blanket of security and prosperity. Under this protection, ideas flowed as freely as goods, creating intellectual exchanges that would reshape human knowledge. Chinese innovations in printing and gunpowder traveled westward, while Islamic astronomy and mathematics journeyed eastward, meeting and mingling in the bazaars and libraries of Central Asian cities that had become cosmopolitan centers of learning. Genghis Khan's approach to governance was as revolutionary as his military tactics had been. Rather than imposing a single system across his diverse empire, he allowed local customs and laws to continue wherever they did not conflict with Mongol authority. It was like tending a garden where many different flowers could bloom simultaneously, each contributing its own beauty to the overall design while drawing nourishment from the same rich soil. The concept of religious tolerance, radical for its time, became a cornerstone of Mongol administration. In the Khan's court, Nestorian Christians debated with Buddhist monks, while Islamic scholars discussed philosophy with Confucian administrators. The Mongol leaders, following their traditional shamanistic beliefs, saw wisdom in learning from all spiritual traditions rather than imposing a single orthodoxy across their diverse subjects. Picture the great capital of Karakoram as it took shape under Ögedei Khan's patronage, a city that embodied the cosmopolitan nature of the Mongol Empire. Here, in the heart of the steppes where Mongol traditions remained strong, rose a metropolis that welcomed visitors from every corner of the known world. The streets echoed with dozens of languages, while the markets offered goods that had traveled thousands of miles to reach this unlikely commercial center. The Mongol postal system, the yam, became the nervous system of this vast empire, enabling communication and coordination across distances that had previously made unified rule impossible. Relay stations were established at regular intervals along major routes, where fresh horses awaited imperial messengers. The system was so efficient that news could travel from Beijing to Karakoram in a matter of days, enabling the central government to respond quickly to events in distant provinces. This remarkable communication network also facilitated the exchange of knowledge and culture. Scholars and artisans could request specific texts or techniques from distant libraries and workshops, confident that their requests would be understood and fulfilled. A mathematician in Baghdad could correspond with a colleague in Beijing, while an artist in Kiev could study techniques developed in Samarkand. The barriers that had once separated civilizations began to dissolve like morning mist under the warming sun. The Mongol legal code, the Yasa, provided a uniform framework for justice across the empire while respecting local customs and traditions. Like a master architect creating a building that could accommodate many different functions, Genghis Khan and his successors developed a system of law that was flexible enough to govern nomads and farmers, merchants and soldiers, believers of many different faiths and followers of ancient traditions. Trade flourished under Mongol protection with an intensity that transformed the global economy. The empire's vast extent meant that luxury goods could travel unprecedented distances without crossing hostile borders or paying tribute to multiple authorities. Silk from China reached European markets with greater reliability than ever before, while European silver flowed eastward to pay for the exotic goods that were transforming Western tastes and technologies. Picture a Venetian merchant arriving in Khanbalik, the Mongol capital in China, after a journey of months across the protected trade routes. The city he encountered would have seemed like something from a dream, with its palaces and gardens, its markets filled with goods from every corner of the empire, its streets bustling with people from dozens of different cultures who had all found opportunities under Mongol rule. The agricultural innovations that spread through the empire during this period were as important as any military conquest. New crops traveled along trade routes, diversifying local agriculture and improving nutrition. Irrigation techniques developed in one region were adapted for use in distant territories with similar climates. The exchange of agricultural knowledge helped support the growing populations that were one of the most visible signs of Mongol prosperity. Artisans and craftsmen found unprecedented opportunities under the cosmopolitan Mongol system. A Chinese porcelain maker might find his techniques studied and adapted by Persian potters, while Islamic metalworkers could learn new decorative styles from Central Asian nomads. The fusion of artistic traditions created new forms of beauty that reflected the interconnected nature of the empire. The Mongol approach to urban planning and architecture also reflected their inclusive philosophy. Rather than destroying existing cities and rebuilding them according to Mongol preferences, they typically enhanced and expanded existing urban centers, adding new districts and improving infrastructure while preserving the character that made each city unique. The result was urban landscapes that reflected both local traditions and imperial grandeur. Scientific knowledge flowed through the empire like water finding its level, with innovations quickly spreading from their points of origin to places where they could be most effectively applied. Medical knowledge from the Islamic world reached China, while Chinese technological innovations transformed manufacturing processes in Central Asia. The cross-pollination of ideas accelerated human progress in ways that would have been impossible without the Mongol Empire's unprecedented connectivity. As night fell over this vast realm, from the walls of Beijing to the shores of the Caspian Sea, the warm glow of prosperity illuminated a world transformed. Under the Mongol peace, humanity had achieved a level of interconnection and cooperation that would not be seen again for centuries. Like stars in the clear steppe sky, individual cultures maintained their distinct identities while contributing to a greater constellation of human achievement. Succession, struggles, and division. The death of Genghis Khan in 1227 marked not an ending, but a transformation, like the moment when a great tree falls in the forest, leaving space for new growth while its seeds scatter on the wind to take root in distant soil. The empire he had built through force of will and genius for leadership now faced its greatest test. Could the unity he had forged survive without the presence of the man who had made it possible? Picture the great Kurultai that gathered in 1229 to choose the next great Khan. Delegates arriving from every corner of the vast empire, like rivers converging into a single stream. The grasslands around Karakoram filled with yurts and horses as representatives of conquered peoples joined Mongol nobles in the solemn task of selecting a successor. The very diversity of the gathering testified to the extraordinary nature of what Genghis Khan had achieved in his lifetime. The choice fell upon Ögedei, the third son, a man whose patient wisdom and diplomatic skills had already proven themselves in the conquest of the Jin dynasty. Unlike his father, who had been forged in the crucible of steppe warfare, Ögedei inherited an empire that required different talents, the ability to balance competing interests, to delegate authority across vast distances, and to maintain unity among peoples who had their own proud traditions and ambitions. Under Ögedei's rule, the empire reached its greatest extent, stretching from Korea to Hungary like a great arc across the top of the world. The campaigns in Europe, led by the brilliant generals Batu Khan and Subutai, demonstrated that Mongol military prowess remained undiminished. Yet even as Mongol armies achieved stunning victories at Mohi and Legnica, the seeds of future division were already taking root in the vast expanse of conquered territory. The challenge was as fundamental as it was inevitable. How could a single authority effectively govern territories so vast that a message from one end to the other took months to deliver? How could nomadic traditions be maintained while administering sedentary populations whose needs and customs were entirely different? Like trying to hold water in cupped hands, the empire's very success created pressures that threatened its unity. Picture Mongol Khan's accession in 1251, achieved only after a struggle that revealed the growing tensions within the Mongol royal family. The Kurultai that elected him was marked by accusations and purges, a far cry from the unanimous acclamation that had greeted earlier successions. The empire remained unified in name, but the cracks were beginning to show like the first signs of spring thaw in winter ice. The conquest of Baghdad in 1258 by Hulagu Khan marked both the height of Mongol power and the beginning of its fragmentation. The destruction of the Abbasid Caliphate eliminated one of the last great centers of resistance to Mongol rule, but it also marked the moment when the empire became too large for unified command. The logistics of coordinating campaigns from China to the Middle East exceeded even the remarkable capabilities of the Mongol administrative system. Kublai Khan's establishment of the Yuan dynasty in China represented a new phase in Mongol history, one where adaptation to local conditions began to outweigh the maintenance of steppe traditions. Picture the great Khan in his Chinese palace, still Mongol in blood and memory, but increasingly Chinese in culture and governance. The transformation was as natural as a river changing course, but it marked a fundamental shift away from the unified steppe empire that Genghis Khan had envisioned. The civil war between Kublai and his brother Arik Böke symbolized the growing divide between different visions of what the Mongol Empire should become. Arik Böke represented the traditional steppe values, the nomadic lifestyle that had given birth to Mongol power, while Kublai embodied adaptation and integration with conquered civilizations. Their conflict was more than a personal rivalry. It was a struggle for the soul of the empire itself. As the 13th century progressed, the great Mongol Empire began to fracture along natural lines, like a continent slowly dividing along geological fault lines. The Ilkhanate in Persia, the Golden Horde in Russia and Eastern Europe, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Yuan dynasty in China each developed its own character, its own relationships with local populations, its own interpretations of Mongol tradition. Picture the Ilkhanate, under Ghazan Khan, where Mongol rulers converted to Islam and began to patronize Persian culture while maintaining their nomadic military traditions. The synthesis was beautiful and complex, like a garden where exotic flowers had been successfully transplanted to foreign soil. Yet this very success in adaptation meant that the Ilkhanate grew increasingly distant from its Mongol origins and from the other successor states. In the Golden Horde, the process of cultural adaptation took a different form. Here, Mongol rulers maintained their dominance over Slavic populations while gradually adopting Islamic faith and Turkic customs. The transformation was gradual, like the slow change of seasons, but it fundamentally altered the character of Mongol rule in Eastern Europe. The fierce warriors who had once swept across the steppes became settled rulers more concerned with taxation and administration than conquest. The Chagatai Khanate, spanning the heart of Central Asia, faced perhaps the greatest challenge in maintaining coherence. The territory included both nomadic peoples who clung to traditional ways and settled populations in ancient cities who had their own deep-rooted customs. The tension between these different lifestyles created a constant strain that would eventually tear the Khanate apart, like fabric stretched beyond its breaking point. Meanwhile, in China, Kublai Khan's Yuan dynasty faced the enormous challenge of governing the world's largest population while maintaining Mongol identity. The emperor's court became a fascinating blend of Mongol traditions and Chinese ceremonial, where Mongol nobles wore silk robes and participated in Confucian rituals while still maintaining their connection to the steppes through seasonal hunts and nomadic festivals. The Mongol administration in China demonstrated remarkable flexibility and innovation. Rather than simply imposing steppe customs on their Chinese subjects, the Mongol rulers created a hybrid system that incorporated the best elements of both traditions. The result was a period of remarkable prosperity and cultural flowering, but it also marked the beginning of the end for unified Mongol rule. As the 14th century dawned, communication between the various Mongol khanates became increasingly difficult and irregular. The Yam postal system, once the pride of the unified empire, began to break down as resources were diverted to local needs and conflicts. Like a great wheel slowly losing its momentum, the machinery of imperial unity began to slow and eventually stop. The religious differences between the various successor states added another layer of complexity to the growing divisions. While the Yuan dynasty maintained traditional Mongol shamanism alongside Chinese Buddhism and Confucianism, the Ilkhanate had converted to Islam, and the Golden Horde was also moving toward Islamic faith. These religious transformations created new loyalties and allegiances that often conflicted with Mongol unity. Trade, which had been one of the great unifying forces of the Mongol Empire, began to suffer as political divisions made long-distance commerce more difficult and dangerous. The Silk Road, which had flourished under unified Mongol protection, faced new obstacles as merchants had to negotiate with multiple authorities and navigate increasingly complex political relationships. Picture a merchant caravan in the late 13th century, still traveling the ancient routes, but now required to carry multiple safe conduct passes and to understand the different customs and regulations of each successor state. The journey that had once been protected by a single authority now required the diplomatic skills of an ambassador and the caution of a spy. The military innovations that had made Mongol conquest possible also began to spread to their enemies, as former subjects learned Mongol tactics and adopted Mongol technologies. The monopoly on military effectiveness that had given the Mongols their initial advantage gradually eroded, like a secret that loses its power once it becomes widely known. As the great unity of the Mongol Empire slowly dissolved, it left behind a transformed world. The period of unified rule had been relatively brief, lasting less than a century, but its impact on human civilization was profound and lasting. Like a stone thrown into a still pond, the Mongol Empire had created ripples that would continue to spread long after the original source of disturbance had disappeared. Fragmentation and the end of an era. By the middle of the 14th century, the great Mongol Empire had transformed from a unified colossus into a collection of independent states, each following its own destiny, like rivers that had once flowed together, but now sought separate paths to the sea. The process was gradual and largely peaceful, lacking the dramatic collapse that had marked the end of other great empires. Instead, it resembled the quiet settling of autumn leaves, each finding its own resting place as the season of unity gave way to a new era of diversity. In China, the Yuan dynasty faced mounting challenges that would eventually lead to its replacement by the Ming. The Mongol rulers, now several generations removed from the steppes, found themselves caught between their nomadic heritage and the demands of governing a vast sedentary population. Picture the last Yuan emperors in their palaces, surrounded by Chinese court ritual, yet still maintaining Mongol customs, like flowers trying to bloom in soil that was gradually becoming unsuitable for their growth. The Red Turban Rebellion that swept across China in the 1350s was fueled not by hatred of the Mongols, but by more prosaic concerns, natural disasters, economic hardship, and the simple desire for change that seems to arise in all societies after extended periods of foreign rule. The rebellion's success owed less to military genius than to the gradual erosion of Mongol administrative efficiency and the natural tendency of all political systems to lose energy over time. Zhu Yuanzhang, who would become the first Ming emperor, represented not revolution, but evolution, the natural succession of one dynasty by another in the eternal cycle of Chinese history. When the Yuan dynasty finally fell in 1368, it was with the quiet dignity of an old tree finally yielding to the wind, its legacy deeply embedded in Chinese culture, even as new rulers took control of the mandate of heaven. The Mongols who retreated to their ancestral steppes carried with them centuries of accumulated wisdom about governance, trade, and diplomacy. They did not disappear into historical obscurity, but rather adapted once again, returning to their nomadic roots while maintaining the sophistication they had gained through their imperial experience. Like a river returning to its original course after a long detour, they found new strength in familiar patterns. In Central Asia, the Chagatai Khanate fragmented into smaller entities, each centered around ancient cities that had their own proud histories and traditions. Samarkand, Bukhara, and other centers of learning and commerce continued to flourish under local rulers who maintained tenuous connections to their Mongol heritage while adapting to the changing political landscape of the region. The transformation of these successor states was like watching a great symphony gradually resolve into individual melodies, each beautiful in its own right, but no longer part of the grand composition that had once united them. The Timurid Empire that emerged in the late 14th century under Tamerlane claimed Mongol descent, but represented a new synthesis of Mongol, Turkish, and Persian traditions. Picture Tamerlane's court in Samarkand, where the architectural grandeur spoke of continuity with the Mongol past, while the cultural innovations pointed toward new possibilities for Central Asian civilization. The great conqueror himself embodied this transition, using Mongol military tactics and claiming Mongol legitimacy while creating something entirely new from the materials left by the fragmenting empire. In the Golden Horde, the process of decline was even more gradual, stretched across centuries as the great Khanate slowly divided into smaller successor states. The Crimean Khanate, the Kazan Khanate, and other inheritors of the Golden Horde's legacy maintained their independence for centuries, gradually losing territory to the expanding Russian Empire, but preserving elements of Mongol culture and administration well into the modern era. The Ilkhanate in Persia dissolved into competing local dynasties that maintained various degrees of connection to Mongol traditions. Some rulers abandoned their nomadic heritage entirely, becoming indistinguishable from other Persian dynasties, while others maintained elements of Mongol law and custom alongside Islamic faith and Persian cultural practices. Throughout this period of fragmentation, trade continued to flow along the ancient routes, though with less security and regularity than during the height of Mongol unity. Merchants adapted to the new political reality, developing new strategies for navigating the complex web of relationships between successor states. The great caravans still moved between East and West, but they now required the skills of diplomats as well as traders. The cultural exchanges that had flourished under unified Mongol rule did not cease with political fragmentation. Ideas, technologies, and artistic traditions continued to spread across Eurasia, though perhaps more slowly and with greater difficulty than before. The networks of communication established during the Mongol peace proved remarkably durable, surviving the political changes that had given birth to them. Picture a scholar in 15th century Herat, still corresponding with colleagues in Beijing and Baghdad, still participating in the intellectual community that had been one of the Mongol Empire's greatest achievements. The political unity was gone, but the habits of mind that had been fostered during the imperial period continued to bear fruit in centers of learning from Cordoba to Karakorum. The military innovations that had made Mongol conquest possible were now widely distributed among their former subjects and enemies. Gunpowder weapons, first encountered by the Mongols in China, had spread throughout Eurasia and were transforming warfare everywhere. The Mongol contribution to this technological revolution was not as inventors, but as facilitators, the intermediaries who had made possible the rapid spread of innovation across continents. Religious tolerance, one of the most distinctive features of Mongol rule, left a lasting impact on the regions they had governed. Even as the successor states adopted specific religious identities, the memory of pluralistic government influenced their policies toward religious minorities. The Mongol example of practical tolerance continued to influence political thinking long after the empire itself had fragmented. The legal traditions established under Mongol rule also proved remarkably durable. Elements of the yasa continued to influence local law codes centuries after the empire's dissolution, while the Mongol emphasis on merit-based promotion and religious tolerance found expression in the administrative systems of many successor states. As the 15th century progressed, the last vestiges of unified Mongol identity gradually faded, like stars disappearing in the dawn light. The various successor states developed their own distinct identities, their own cultural syntheses, their own interpretations of the Mongol legacy. Yet even as political unity dissolved, the impact of the Mongol centuries continued to shape the development of Eurasian civilization in countless subtle ways. The end of the Mongol Empire was not a catastrophe, but a transformation. Not a failure, but a natural evolution. Like a great river that eventually divides into multiple channels as it approaches the sea, the empire had accomplished its historical purpose by the time it began to fragment. It had connected the world, facilitated unprecedented cultural exchange, and created new possibilities for human cooperation that would outlast any single political entity. The lasting legacy of the Mongol Empire. As we stand at the end of our journey through the rise and fall of the Mongol Empire, we find ourselves not at a conclusion, but at a new beginning. For the story of the Mongols did not end with the dissolution of their political unity. Like seeds scattered by the wind, their influence took root in countless aspects of human civilization, growing into contributions that continue to shape our world today. The empire that began with a young boy's dreams under the vast steppe, sky, left echoes that still resonate across continents and centuries. The most immediate and visible legacy of the Mongol Empire lies in the genetic heritage of the peoples they once ruled. Modern DNA analysis reveals that millions of people across Asia and Eastern Europe carry genetic markers that can be traced back to the Mongol expansion, creating a biological testament to the empire's vast reach. Yet this genetic legacy is perhaps the least important aspect of their continuing influence on human civilization. The Mongol contribution to world trade created patterns of commerce that persisted long after their political control had ended. The trade routes they protected and expanded continued to carry goods, ideas, and technologies between East and West well into the early modern period. When European explorers began seeking sea routes to Asia in the 15th and 16th centuries, they were motivated partly by the desire to bypass the overland routes that the Mongols had once made safe and profitable. Picture Christopher Columbus with his maps and dreams of reaching the Indies, inspired by the accounts of Marco Polo and other travelers who had witnessed the wealth and wonder of the Mongol Empire at its height. The age of exploration itself can be seen as an attempt to recreate the global connections that had existed under Mongol rule, using ships instead of horses to bridge the vast distances between civilizations. The Mongol approach to religious tolerance left a profound impact on political philosophy and governance. Their practical demonstration that diverse religious communities could coexist peacefully under a single authority provided a model that influenced later concepts of religious freedom and pluralistic government. The idea that effective rule did not require religious uniformity became an important precedent for more modern concepts of tolerance and diversity. In the realm of military science, Mongol innovations in organization, tactics, and logistics continued to influence military thinking for centuries. Their decimal system of military organization, their emphasis on mobility and communication, and their integration of diverse military technologies became standard practices that were adopted by armies across Eurasia. The Mongol military manual, such as it was, became a textbook studied by generals from Napoleon to modern times. The postal system developed by the Mongols, the yam, provided a model for efficient long-distance communication that influenced the development of postal services worldwide. The concept of relay stations, standardized routes, and centralized coordination that made the Mongol Empire manageable across vast distances became fundamental principles of modern communication networks, from the Pony Express to the Internet. Mongol legal traditions, particularly their emphasis on merit-based advancement and practical justice, contributed to the development of more modern legal systems. The Yasa's focus on actual behavior rather than social status or religious affiliation anticipated later developments in jurisprudence that emphasized equality before the law. Many legal scholars trace certain principles of international law back to Mongol practices in governing diverse populations. The cultural exchanges facilitated by the Mongol Empire created artistic and intellectual traditions that continued to develop long after the empire's political dissolution. The synthesis of Chinese, Islamic, and European artistic traditions that flourished under Mongol patronage produced new forms of beauty that influenced aesthetic development across Eurasia. Mongol-era artistic works continue to be treasured in museums and collections worldwide. Picture the breathtaking illuminated manuscripts produced in Mongol scriptoriums, where Chinese landscape techniques merged with Islamic calligraphy and European narrative traditions to create works of art that transcended any single cultural tradition. These masterpieces stand as testament to the creative possibilities that emerge when diverse civilizations interact peacefully and productively. The Mongol impact on urban development and architecture also proved lasting. Cities that flourished under Mongol rule, from Karakoram to Beijing to Samarkand, incorporated planning principles and architectural innovations that influenced urban development for centuries. The Mongol preference for cosmopolitan cities that could accommodate diverse populations became a model for later imperial capitals around the world. In the sphere of science and technology, the Mongol Empire's role as a facilitator of knowledge transfer had consequences that extended far beyond their own era. The rapid spread of innovations like printing, gunpowder, and astronomical instruments across the Mongol territories accelerated human technological development in ways that are still being discovered by historians of science. The Mongol example of adaptive leadership, their ability to learn from conquered peoples and incorporate new ideas into their governing systems, provided a model for effective cross-cultural administration that influenced imperial systems well into the modern era. The British Empire, the Russian Empire, and other later imperial systems all drew lessons from Mongol methods of governing diverse populations across vast territories. Perhaps most importantly, the Mongol Empire demonstrated that global unity and cooperation were not only possible but beneficial for all participants. Their proof that barriers between civilizations could be overcome, that diverse peoples could work together toward common goals, and that cultural exchange enriched rather than diminished human societies provided a vision of international cooperation that continues to inspire efforts at global governance today. Modern international organizations, from the United Nations to the World Trade Organization, can trace their conceptual roots back to the Mongol demonstration that effective coordination across vast distances and cultural differences was achievable. The Mongol Empire was humanity's first truly global political entity, and its successes and failures continue to inform discussions about globalization and international cooperation. The environmental impact of the Mongol Empire also deserves recognition. Their vast territories included some of the world's most important ecosystems, and their traditional nomadic lifestyle represented a sustainable relationship with the natural world that modern environmentalists study as a model for conservation. The Mongol approach to land use, which emphasized mobility and seasonal rotation, allowed natural systems to recover and regenerate in ways that sedentary agriculture often does not. As we conclude our gentle journey through the history of the Mongol Empire, we can see that their legacy extends far beyond the political boundaries they once controlled. Like ripples spreading outward from a stone dropped in still water, their influence continues to shape human civilization in ways both obvious and subtle, direct and indirect. The boy who became Genghis Khan, standing beneath the vast steppe sky and dreaming of unity, could hardly have imagined that his vision would continue to influence human society 8 centuries later. Yet, in our interconnected modern world, with its global trade networks, international organizations, and cross-cultural exchanges, we can see reflections of the Mongol achievement. They showed us that the world could be one, and that lesson continues to resonate as we work toward our own visions of global cooperation and understanding. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, perhaps you can imagine yourself standing on those same steps where it all began, feeling the wind that carries the whispers of history, gazing up at the same stars that witnessed the rise and fall of the greatest land empire in human history. The Mongols showed us what was possible when barriers fell and peoples united, and their example continues to light our way toward a more connected and cooperative world. The empire that began with the dreams of one abandoned child became a legacy that belongs to all humanity, a reminder that even the vastest achievements emerge from simple beginnings, and that the greatest gift any civilization can leave is the demonstration that unity and cooperation can overcome any obstacle, that understanding can bridge any divide, and that the human spirit, like the eternal blue sky above the steppes, knows no boundaries. Sleep well, dear listeners, and may your dreams be filled with the gentle wisdom of the past and the boundless possibilities of the future, carried on winds that have blown across continents and through centuries, whispering of the extraordinary things that become possible when we dare to dream of a world united beneath the stars.